Welcome to the Global Lens, bringing you the latest news from around the world. The Supreme Court has delivered a decision, one that could reshape the very fabric of global commerce. Its impact will echo far beyond the marble halls of Washington, reverberating through markets and boardrooms around the world. In a landmark July 2025 ruling, the court struck down the legal foundation for the Trump-era tariffs, a move that stunned both supporters and critics. For years, these taxes on imports quietly inflated prices for everyday goods, from groceries to electronics, and strained relationships with America's closest allies, fueling trade disputes and diplomatic tensions. The decision ends a contentious chapter in U.S. economic policy, closing the book on a period marked by uncertainty and division. Now, the nation faces a pivotal question. What comes next for American trade and its role in the world? The tariffs, once justified as national security measures, were also a dramatic assertion of presidential power, bypassing Congress's traditional authority in trade matters and setting a controversial precedent. The court's intervention re-examines this delicate balance, questioning whether a president should have the unilateral power to reshape the nation's economic relationships with the stroke of a pen. The ruling will be felt immediately in consumer wallets, as prices on imported goods may begin to fall, and on company balance sheets, as businesses adjust to a new trade landscape and reconsider their global strategies. Power now shifts back toward Congress, restoring its constitutional role in shaping trade policy and opening the door for new debates and legislation. As the dust settles, the world is watching closely. Will this lead to a de-escalation of trade tensions and renewed global cooperation, or will protectionist forces regroup and find new avenues to influence policy, keeping barriers in place? This moment is a critical juncture, offering a rare chance to rebuild alliances, restore trust, and rethink the rules of international commerce for a new era of opportunity and challenge. To truly understand the Supreme Court's recent ruling, we need to revisit the origins of the modern trade war and the legal tools that made it possible. This context is crucial for grasping the far-reaching consequences of the court's decision. The main legislative weapons were Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act and Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act. These laws, though decades old, became the backbone of a new era of aggressive trade policy. Section 232 gave the president broad authority to impose tariffs if imports were deemed a threat to national security. The Trump administration invoked this power widely, slapping tariffs on steel and aluminum from many countries, including some of America's closest allies, sparking controversy at home and abroad. Meanwhile, Section 301 allowed the U.S. to retaliate against unfair foreign trade practices. It was used almost exclusively against China, targeting issues like intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and market access barriers. This tit-for-tat approach led to escalating tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars in goods. China responded by targeting U.S. agricultural exports, hitting American farmers and rural communities especially hard. Economists widely argued that tariffs function as a hidden tax on American consumers and businesses, raising prices on everyday goods and squeezing small companies already operating on thin margins. While some industries competing with imports welcomed protectionism, many manufacturers who relied on imported materials faced higher costs, supply chain disruptions, and increased uncertainty about the future. The use of national security as a justification for tariffs on allied nations was especially divisive. It strained diplomatic ties, undermined trust, and threatened decades of progress toward more open, liberalized global trade. The result was a climate of uncertainty, mistrust, and a global shift toward protectionism, with markets reacting nervously and international cooperation faltering. The tariff wars were waged not only with economic data and statistics, but also with diplomatic capital, as countries maneuvered for advantage and tried to protect their own interests. The true costs, both economic and diplomatic, are still being calculated today, as the world continues to grapple with the long-term effects of these trade battles. The era of tariffs and protectionist policies created clear winners and losers in the American economy, dividing communities and industries across the country. Domestic steel and aluminum industries were among the biggest beneficiaries. Companies like U.S. Steel and Nucor saw profits rise, production ramp up, and even began rehiring workers who had previously lost their jobs. For these communities, tariffs were more than just policy. They were a lifeline, bringing hope and renewed economic activity to towns that had struggled for years. But for every winner, there were many more losers. Manufacturers that relied on steel and aluminum, such as Ford and GM, faced sharply higher costs for essential materials, with each company losing over $1 billion as a direct result. Most of these companies passed the increased costs on to consumers, raising prices on everything from cars to household appliances, and making American products less competitive both at home and abroad. Farmers were hit especially hard by China's retaliation, particularly soybean growers, who saw their largest export market evaporate almost overnight. Many were pushed to the brink of bankruptcy, requiring massive government bailouts just to survive. This created a paradox. Tariffs inflicted economic harm that government subsidies then tried to fix, often with mixed results and added uncertainty for families. Ultimately, American consumers bore much of the cost. Research shows that importers and consumers paid nearly the entire tariff bill, not foreign exporters as was often promised. Everyday goods like washing machines saw double-digit price hikes, making basic necessities more expensive for millions of families. These price increases acted as a regressive tax, hitting lower and middle-income families the hardest, and forcing many to make difficult choices about their household budgets. The promise that China would pay for the tariffs simply did not materialize. Instead, the burden fell squarely on American businesses and families. The economic pain was widespread, touching small businesses, farmers, and consumers, while the benefits of protectionism remained concentrated in a few select industries. The debate over protectionism remains unresolved, with policymakers and experts still divided over whether the costs outweigh the benefits for the nation as a whole. The Supreme Court's decision wasn't about the wisdom of tariffs, but about the separation of powers. The legal challenge centered on the non-delegation doctrine. Congress cannot hand its legislative powers to another branch. Section 232 gave the president sweeping authority to impose tariffs under a vague national security justification. The court ruled this was too broad, effectively giving the president a blank check over trade policy. The decision invalidates the legal basis for steel and aluminum tariffs, sending a clear message. The power to tax and regulate foreign commerce belongs to Congress. The era of using national security as a catch-all for protectionism has come to a decisive legal end. The economic impact of tariffs was clear in the data. Studies from the Federal Reserve and top universities found tariffs cost U.S. companies and consumers billions each month, with real income losses and higher prices. The idea that foreign countries paid the tariffs was a myth. The burden fell on Americans. While some jobs were created in steel and aluminum, far more were lost elsewhere. Net job losses exceeded 400,000. Retaliation from other countries hit U.S. exports, especially agriculture, with exports to China plummeting. Global supply chains were disrupted, forcing businesses to scramble for new suppliers. The tariffs reduced U.S. GDP by about 0.3%, representing tens of billions in lost output. More damaging was the uncertainty, which discouraged business investment. Companies hesitated to invest, knowing trade policy could change overnight. The hidden cost of the trade wars was persistent policy uncertainty. The data left little doubt tariffs hurt more than they helped. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point in the balance of power over trade. For decades, Congress delegated more trade authority to the president, but the court's ruling reasserts Congress's constitutional role. Now, presidents can't impose broad tariffs on vague national security grounds without clear congressional approval. Trade disputes will require public debate, hearings, and votes, making the process more transparent but also more complex. This shift could lead to more stable, predictable trade policy, as laws passed by Congress are harder to reverse. Allies may find it easier to trust U.S. commitments backed by Congress. However, the legislative process is slow and vulnerable to gridlock. In a fast-moving global economy, this could be a disadvantage. The challenge is finding a new equilibrium, balancing constitutional roles with the need for decisive action. The ruling forces Washington to confront this challenge head-on. The Supreme Court's decision to nullify Section 232 tariffs brings immediate relief. Consumers should see lower prices as tariffs on imports are lifted, though it may take time to filter through supply chains. Businesses, especially manufacturers, will benefit from lower input costs and renewed competitiveness. The end of tariffs removes a major source of uncertainty, encouraging investment and expansion. Retaliatory tariffs from allies are expected to be lifted, reopening key export markets for American goods. Sectors like whiskey, blue jeans, and motorcycles will regain tariff-free access abroad. Internationally, the decision signals a U.S. return to rules-based global trade. It opens the door to mending alliances and tackling shared challenges like unfair practices from China. The ruling doesn't solve all trade problems, but it removes a major obstacle to cooperation. The Supreme Court's ruling clarifies the law, but not the deeper debate between free trade and protectionism. Free trade advocates see this as a victory for consumers and global cooperation, arguing tariffs hurt more than they help. Protectionists, including some labor unions and industry leaders, argue the court stripped the nation of a vital defense against unfair competition. They warn that focusing only on consumer prices ignores the social costs of deindustrialization. The debate now shifts to Congress. Should policy prioritize low prices and global efficiency, or domestic jobs and industry security? The political energy behind economic nationalism remains strong, and new legislative battles are likely. The Supreme Court has handed the choice back to the American people and their representatives. The Supreme Court's decision to strike down the tariffs is a watershed moment. It dismantles a protectionist framework that raised costs, strained alliances, and triggered retaliation. The ruling shifts trade authority back to Congress, reinforcing constitutional principles. The key facts: tariffs didn't force other countries to pay, caused net job losses, and damaged diplomacy. The U.S. now faces a reset, an opportunity to repair alliances and rethink trade policy. The debate over globalization versus domestic security is far from settled. Economic nationalism will now play out in Congress, potentially leading to more targeted protectionism. America's next move will define its economic leadership for a generation.